Hello, good afternoon. My name is Sarah Hunstead. I'm a paediatric nurse, mum of two, author of A Life, a Finger, a Pee Up a Nose, a practical guide to baby and child first aid. And I'm also founder of CPR Kids. And at CPR Kids, we empower parents and families with the life-saving skills of baby and child first aid and recognition of the sick child. And we also love doing these Facebook Live events so that we can bring you some good, accurate information on child health topics. So you don't have to go to Dr. Google, because you never know what you will find when that happens. Today, we are going to be talking about flying with babies. I don't know about you, but it can be a bit of a daunting thing. However, with lots of family overseas, for me, I think the first flight my child ever had, my first one, she was 6 weeks old. The first time we flew, it was actually a lot easier than what I thought. What is a lot harder than what I thought is flying with a toddler. That can be rather challenging. But we will be talking about basically really what do you need to take with you when you're flying with a baby on the plane, really from a health and safety perspective. And the other thing that I would love you guys to know about is that CPR Kids, we've just launched our e-learning course. This is so exciting for us. Nothing replaces a face-to-face course. We know that. It is so important that you get to a face-to-face course, but sometimes you can't. Sometimes you need a refresher in between. And so we have brought the learning to you. Our foundation course has been released, and that is CPR and choking, and all the other first aid subjects will be coming before the end of the year. So that's just a little, public service announcement that I had to tell you about, that I'm tremendously excited about. But let's get on with traveling on planes with infants. And what I'd love you to do, if you can give me a thumbs up or a wave if you can hear me well, just so we can make sure that all the technology is working. And remember, you can ask questions. Make sure you just type them in the comments below while we are live, and I will endeavour to answer them. If I can't answer it, then I will research it and get you the answer when we're finished. So, first of all, let's talk about some safety aspects. Now, certainly when I have travelled with little ones, particularly babies, and here's a baby I prepared earlier, not a very pretty one, but definitely a baby, I have always had them in lap with a seat belt. So that additional seat belt, so they're in there, and also being seated in a place where they've actually got the bassinet in front of you that you can put the baby in. But for takeoff, landing, any time the seatbelt sign is on, baby was required not to be in the bassinet, but to be on laps with their additional seatbelt as well. There is also the option for babies or children to travel in their own seat, such as in a car seat. So you can take your baby capsule, you can take the child's car seat and actually have that in a seat next to you as well. Of course, you've got to pay more money because you need to actually purchase the seat too, but it is an option. Because particularly if you are doing a long haul flight, one of the important things to consider is, where is your baby going to sleep safely? So ideally, you are placed into a seat that has got the infant bassinet for them to sleep on. What is definitely not recommended is that you lay down across seats with your baby in your arms. There is significant risk of the baby falling, of the baby being suffocated by your body, of course completely unintentionally, but it is not a safe place for a baby to sleep. And particularly if they are not strapped in, if there's unexpected turbulence, your baby then turns into a flying object, which is not good for your baby and not good for anybody who, particularly if they're being propelled somewhere that your baby hits, including you. So it's really important that seatbelt is on at all times, or that strap that is in the bassinet is actually secured across your baby. It's a really, really important thing to do. Or you've brought your own car seat onto the plane. But one thing to also be aware of is that if you are taking your seat or your capsule onto the plane, you need to have a chat with the manufacturer first, because remember, a lot of these seats aren't intended for babies to sleep in for a long period of time. So if you've got, a 24-hour flight, you need to be really cautious that your baby isn't in that seat for a prolonged amount of time. So that's something that you need to research about your particular seat that you have for your child. What else? Another big tip, don't seat your baby or your toddler or your child, as a matter of fact, in the aisle seat. It's really important, because what happens when you're getting served, lunch, food, or coffee over the top of your baby, straight over the top of your child, over your 4-year-old who's wriggling around in their seat and then knocks the stewardess's hand and coffee goes everywhere. Big risk of burns, really important. Don't seat them in that aisle seat. The other thing as well is that I personally have seen this quite a few times when I was working in an emergency department, is that children playing with the seat mechanism, you know how that you can actually lift up the arm of the seat? If that comes down suddenly, that is a crush injury or an amputation to a finger. So be really, really cautious that, and certainly I've actually seen a few babies who were in arms being fed, bottle, breastfed, whatever, and their hand has actually gotten just kind of stuck underneath mum's arm into the seat mechanism, and they've ended up with crush injuries. So it's really important, be aware of those arm and seat mechanisms as well when you've got your babies around, because we need to preserve those beautiful little fingers. So think about that. Also, think about, what are you taking with you on the plane? Now, if it is in Australia here, for example, if it is just an Australian flight, you can take everything you need on the plane. There's no restrictions for fluids. That's an important thing. So you can take, your bottles of medication, whatever it is that you need, your formula, all that kind of stuff. When you're flying internationally, before you go, and a good deal of time before you go, make sure that you double and triple check with your airline what the restrictions are, because depending on where you're flying into or out of with connecting flights, things like that, there can be really tight restrictions on the amount of fluids that you can take in. So if you're planning on preparing a whole lot of bottles of formula, you don't want to be standing in line, going through customs, having to pour all of that out. Also thinking about medications as well. Now, prescription medications, a letter from your doctor, speak to your airline, speak to the airport that you're going out of, and they'll advise you, but you should be able to take prescription medications. Because of course children, they take liquids, don't they? What can be restricted and you may have to throw out is over-the-counter medications that are in large bottles. So for example, don't go and buy the bulk bottle of ibuprofen or paracetamol for your long-haul flight, because chances are you're going to have to end up pouring that down. What can you do about that? Well, of course, there is the ability that you could decant some of that into a smaller bottle. It's not really recommended, though. We really shouldn't be decanting medications into unlabeled non-medication containers. When you're tired, it just increases the risk of an overdose of that medication. It's really probably not worth the risk. What you can do is you can get a stronger concentration. For example, a paracetamol bottle that might be this big might have 48 milligrams in 1 ml, so you work out the dose for that. You could get the baby drop ones if it's just for one flight, or just for, you're heading over to London or something like that. You can get the smaller concentrations. Those bottles are small enough that they will pass through customs. What you need to work out, though, is the dose for your child, because remember, they are really, really concentrated. So you might give your child 5 mils of the big bottle of Panadol, but if you gave them 5 mils of the little bottle of paracetamol, that would be overdosing them. So it's really, really important that if you are going to go for the more concentrated types, that you do actually work out the correct dose for your child's weight before you go. So why am I talking about medications in the first place? Now, while you're in flight, you can guarantee almost that something will happen. Your child will end up with the sniffles. They might end up with a bit of a fever and they're miserable. They might be teething and they're miserable. It's a good idea to travel with, in my opinion, some simple analgesia. So your paracetamol or your ibuprofen, whatever it is that works well for you and your child. I personally like traveling with an electrolyte solution as well, just in case, coming home from Bali, you get the VOMs, bit of diarrhea. Definitely a good idea to travel with some hydrolyte or whatever it is that's your choice. You don't have to get the liquid, you can get the effervescent tablets so that you're not restricted by the liquids. So that's definitely a good idea. Antihistamines are often a really good one to travel with too. And of course, if your child has asthma or anaphylaxis, that you are making sure that you are traveling with an adequate amount of adrenaline auto-injectors, EpiPens, and also their inhalers, their asthma inhalers. It's really, really important that you make sure that you have got a good supply of all of that. And of course, any regular medications that you or your child are on, you want them in your carry-on baggage, not under the plane. Believe me, I have seen families who've made that mistake. It's easy to do when you're in a rush. You're traveling with kids, for goodness sake. Everything's stressful. Just make sure that those medications are in your carry-on baggage. Okay, please do that. And the most common question that I do get asked about is that the most common complaint, ears. They're, traveling babies, little kids, they're crying and they're holding their ears. Why does this happen? It happens because of the pressure change. So on takeoff and on landing, the pressure changes, and what happens is on one side of the eardrum, there's a certain air pressure. On the outside of the eardrum, the pressure is different. And so we need to equalize to even that out. But if we're unable to equalize, then what happens is you get that awful ear pain. And in kids, it can be more tricky because they use eustachian tubes, or the tubes that connect their ears to the rest of their insides here, that they can be quite narrow. Often if they've got a cold, or if they have glue ear or something like that, then that can really be quite painful for them. So what do you need to do? So some tips and tricks. What I'd love you to do is put in the comments any tips or tricks that you have used to help alleviate ear pain in your kids. But you've got to remember that the pain is temporary as well. But still, when you're on a plane with a whole lot of other people and your kid's screaming and they're all looking at you, you kind of wish it's going to go away pretty quickly. So what can you do? Get them to suck or swallow. That's a really important thing, because the sucking or swallowing, so whether it's getting them to suck on a dummy, whether it's feeding on the way up and on the way down, although just make sure that if you're bottle feeding that they're not, laying completely back, because we don't want that kind of running up. So what we do, we've got them up a little bit. We're breastfeeding them, we're bottle feeding them, we're getting them to do that sucking motion or on a dummy, because what that does is it helps the ears to equalize. So that's a really good thing that you can do. If it's older children, and I mean older children, you're not going to give your 2-year-old some chewing gum. Getting them to chew on gum or suck on hard lollies is a good thing. Please, please, please make sure that's age appropriate though, because those hard lollies can easily lodge in an airway and cause a choking obstruction. So please remember, this is age appropriate. So getting them to chew. If you can get them to yawn, often they will copy you what you're doing. So yawning helps equalize as well. But mainly with the babies, that sucking is what they need to do. So if you can get them to suck on a dummy, fantastic. If you can feed them on the way up and the way down, brilliant. And the good thing is that often what can happen is that you can actually manage to get your baby and feed them while they still have that seatbelt on. Trust me, it's doable. I've done it plenty of times, and I used to just feed my babies all the way up and all the way down. And you know what? There's still some tears. It still hurt, but it definitely relieved it. Now, what I'd love you to do is tell us any tips or tricks that you have when flying with infants. So all we've talked about is basically the health and safety. That's really important. But any other tips and tricks that you've got that you want to share that makes traveling easier, then please pop them in the comments below. We will post this to our page as well, so you can come back and watch it anytime. And if you have any questions, please type them in now. And what I would love you to do, particularly if you are going away on holidays, is please book into a course today. Don't put it off any longer. You need to learn the life-saving skills of baby and child first aid and CPR. And what I would love you to do is please give us a ring, jump on online. If we're not near you, we'll help you find a provider that is, because no matter what, at the end of the day, the most important thing is that you know how to help your child confidently in an emergency. So we will put the link down below to our new e-learning course as well. And what we'd love you to do is please jump in the comments. What do you want us to talk about next? What would you like to know about? So let us know, and we would love to bring you some Facebook Live topics on that. Okay. See you later, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon.